Well, hello, I'm Hans Rasmussen, one of the Evangelists of the Denver Church of Christ, and I want to bring you greetings from my kitchen. We're doing a church online, and I know some of us have struggled with that new paradigm. I know some of us have also struggled with communion. And I got the communion bread recipe from Vicky, who normally makes every week for our Vada location. And I've got a challenge for all the men in our church. I want to challenge all of you to make a batch of communion bread. And I'm going to show you how, and I'm going to share a few thoughts from the scripture as we make it. So I'll put the instructions in the comments. But out of curiosity, how many of you like bread? I know that a lot of people like bread. Pretty much everybody seems like they like bread. I know some of you have to eat gluten-free bread, but I know currently bread is a little bit hard to come by. I know a lot of the shelves are empty, and that can be unnerving compared to our normal shopping habits. But every culture on earth seems to love bread. I read a stat that Americans alone eat 34 million loaves of bread a day, not to mention rolls and bagels and croissants and pitas and donuts and the dozens of other kinds of breads that are consumed. And bread is just a major staple of every nation on earth. There's the Mexican tortillas, Jewish matzah bread, or communion bread. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some communion bread. I want to share a few thoughts as I make it. And the recipe is there for you. So I'm going to grab a bowl and start making here a little bit. So back in Jesus' day, bread was super important. So there's 3/4 cup of flour or gluten-free. But back in the days of Jesus, if he wanted to get bread, it wasn't just as simple as going to the grocery store and buying a loaf. Back in the day, it would take the better part of a day to grind the wheat, to put enough wood into the fireplace to bake the bread, and there's no stoves with temperature settings at the time. And so then to prepare the bread and to cook the bread, you needed a bunch of time. And so bread was very labor-intensive product. It took a lot of effort for them to be able to make the bread. But then along comes Jesus. And just a couple days prior to our story that we're going to read here in a minute, we read about this large crowd of people that had gathered to hear Jesus preach. And as the day wears on, Jesus notes that the people needed to eat and performs this miracle where he feeds 5,000 with just 5 small loaves of bread and 2 fish. When it was all over, they collected 12 baskets full of leftovers. The people were very impressed. And then Jesus just up and disappears, and they don't know where he went. And the people began to get anxious, and they began to hunt for him, similar to how people are responding to toilet paper in the grocery stores right now. But when they did find him, they wanted more bread from Jesus. But apparently, Jesus wasn't just going to give them bread anymore. And it upset the crowd so much so that they tried to shame him into doing the miracle again. And in John chapter 6, verses 30 and 31, it says, "Then they asked him, 'What sign will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them bread from heaven to eat.' 'Look,' they said, 'Moses supplied manna for the people every day, and you've only done it once. Do another miracle.' And so Jesus declared, 'I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty.'" Now that seems like an odd thing to say to the crowd that wants more bread. Not only is Jesus not going to give them what they asked for, he turns it into a teaching situation. He says, "I am the bread of life." And so what does he mean by that? What does he mean that I am the bread of life? Because what caught my attention is that he didn't say, "I'm the giver of bread." Instead, he says, "I am the bread." And I started to wonder, why does Jesus say it that way? And then it occurred to me. They wanted the bread, but they didn't necessarily want Jesus. I was watching this video of about a dad who often went on speaking engagements. And so he would travel and go to the airport and fly to wherever he was going. And on the trip, he always bought his kids a gift. And as he was buying those gifts at the airport, he would get them little different things and come back, and the kids just loved it. And more as he would get these gifts, the kids got more and more excited for him to leave because they couldn't wait for him to get out of town because they knew that he was going to get a gift. And he talked about how these kids started to want the gift more than the gift giver. And I found it interesting that he said that the children got to the point where they thought they could do without him as long as they could get a blessing from him. And when Jesus said, I am the bread, what he was saying is that we couldn't get the blessing without him. I am the bread. I give you bread, but you can't get the bread without me. Essentially, without Jesus, we're not going to get the blessing that God wants to give us. And there's a lot going on in people's lives right now. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of pain, a lot of fear. I think as Christians, we need to look and acknowledge if we've stumbled in our faith because we've lost some of the blessings. See, if when we lose a house or a car or a job, and then we lose faith, we need to look and be really honest. Was that faith based on the physical blessing? Could it be that we wanted the blessing more than we wanted Jesus? I think the best way to protect ourselves from this trap is to begin to realize we didn't deserve those blessings to begin with. I've often reflected on the gifts that God has given me and thought, I don't deserve this. I don't deserve to be a minister for a group as good as you are. I don't deserve a home that I live in. I don't deserve to have the vehicle that I have. I don't deserve to have children that I've been blessed with. And I recognize all these gifts are from God. But I also recognize that at any moment, I could lose them. And I'm thankful to God that He's granted me the kindness that I have them right now. See, Jesus is the bread of life. With Him, we can receive bread and other gifts, but without Him, those gifts, they just truly mean nothing. And I've got my dough mixed here, but it looks like it needs some more flour. And so I don't know, as you think about your life recently, are there things that you've lost? Or there's things that you fear losing? I know many have been laid off. I know many have had their hours cut, or they fear that they're not going to be able to make their mortgage payments. And as you look at those things, do you look at the blessing and that God has given you and get frustrated that God isn't blessing more? Or are you grateful for what God has given you? Because without Jesus, those gifts mean nothing. I think it's exactly why Jesus said earlier, He said, I am the vine, and you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. He says, you're not going to get these blessings without me. It's a package deal. But now there's another part of this bread of life statement that I found interesting. And it's a little later in chapter 6. Jesus says this. In John chapter 6, 48 through 52, He says, I am the bread of life. Your ancestors ate manna in the wilderness, yet they died. But here is the bread that comes down from heaven, which anyone may eat and not die. I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. This bread is my flesh, which I give for the life of the world. Then the Jews began to argue sharply among themselves. How can this man give us flesh to eat? And I'm sure they're thinking, eat his flesh? Seriously? That's what it sounds like, right? To become cannibals. And so does Jesus actually teach us that we need to engage in cannibalism? No. First, Jesus isn't talking about real bread here. When He said that I'm the bread of life, what He meant was that every time you look at a loaf of bread, remember that just like you need bread to live, you need me to live too. You need me to survive in this world. Jesus had said other things like this at other times in His ministry. When Jesus said, I am the vine, was He saying that He was a literal vine? Well, no. What He was saying is that every time you see a vine with the fruit on it, you need to remember that the fruit depends on the vine. Remember that I am your vine, and that you depend on me for life. And when Jesus said that I am the gate, was He saying He's a literal gate? No. He was saying, just remember that just like the gate keeps bad things from going out or coming in, and the good things to go out, I'll keep the bad things out, and I'll let good things go in. So Jesus wasn't talking here about real vine or a real gate, or in this case, real bread. In this teaching, He was talking about sacrificing His flesh on the cross. And notice what Jesus said here in John chapter 6, verse 49. The bread that I give you for the life of the world is my flesh. Bread gives us life, and like physical bread, Jesus' body on the cross was going to give us life. Thus, every time you pick up a piece of bread at communion, that's what Jesus wants us to remember, that it's life that he gives us, that he offers his flesh for our salvation. And at the Last Supper, which took place before he was crucified, he took bread and he gave thanks and he broke it, saying to them, "This is my body for you. Do this in remembrance of me." The bread at that meal wasn't Jesus' body because he hadn't died yet. What he was telling his disciples was every time that you take communion, you take the bread, that you need to remember what I did on the cross. And when you eat the bread, you have to remember my sacrifice. But that bread isn't Jesus anymore. Then the vine is Jesus, or the gate is Jesus. See, the bread is there to remind us of what Jesus has done for us. Jesus said, "I am the bread of life." Over in Exodus chapter 12, verse 39, with the dough that the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. So that Passover bread was without yeast. It was without leaven. And why? Well, it says because they had to make it in haste. They had to hurry up and get their bread made and run out of that. And I got to thinking, so this example in the Old Testament is this foreshadowing of Jesus, right? And is there things that we can parallel to that story that Jesus and doing it in haste? And none of us like to be busy. None of us like to run around. And I think there's a couple different things of why and how that this bread of Jesus is something that we can eat with haste. I think one, sometimes folks who want to become Christians will tell me that they want to wait to get baptized till a special day, or wait for Sunday when everybody can be there. And I go, I really discourage that, because you never know what your future holds. Right now are super uncertain times, and I know many people are wrestling with their relationship with God and their salvation. And man, somebody might die between now and when they make that decision to get baptized. And salvation is way too important to put off on another day. And we have to figure out how to do that in these social distancing times right now. But Jesus is the bread of life, and we've got to make haste to take hold of him in that way. And I think the second thing is that now that we're Christians, each day is precious. Ephesians says, make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. You and I are not going to live forever. Jesus is our bread of life, and we must make haste to serve him and do what we can with the days that we've been given. I think especially now that things are uncertain and things are moving so fast. As a man, what can you do to reach out, to help, to connect with somebody, and really be sustained by Jesus? And as you take communion in your home this Sunday, really remember his sacrifice and his love that he gave for us, that we could be different and live a new life in him.